mechanisms, then there's no truth there. That is actually false, because truth is a comparison of things. And so as long as a mind can hold a concept about reality, and there's a reality to compare it to, then the truth value of that concept exists, independent of whether or not that mind came about by purely mechanistic means, whether or not it was designed by a designer.
What is up, everyone? So glad you decided to click on this one, because I promise you, this exchange is something else entirely. We have Matt going head-to-head with Posh on the Modern Day Debate channel over one question: is Christianity rational? Now, that sounds like your standard theology versus atheism back and forth, but what actually unfolds here is something way more specific and way more interesting. Posh builds his entire case around the idea that without God, you cannot have truth claims at all, and Matt does not just disagree with that. He methodically takes it apart piece by piece, using Posh's own examples against him. Trust me when I say the second half of this clip is where it gets really good, so make sure you stay all the way through, because the moment Matt drops the word dishonest on live debate, the whole energy shifts. Also really want to know where you are all watching from today. Drop your city or your country in the comments. I genuinely love seeing where this community reaches across the world. All right, enough from me. Let us get into it.
People who ask, can God do this or can God do that, it is because they inhabit a certain reality that God established in a certain way. To say if God could create things differently, sure. But that is now in the realm of hypothetical of what God can and cannot do. And it's sort of like trying to define infinity. You cannot define infinity except for an endless set of finite things. So it's similar to, can God create a rock so heavy he can't lift it? And would someone accept the answer, the endless and infinite growth of a rock and the endless ability of God to lift it? Or would it have to be finalized, because then we're not talking about a transcendent God? So that is this pulling back the transcendent into the material and the natural, and then trying to compare them. That's not how it's going to work. But could God create a unicorn from a horse? Yes, absolutely. The horn has to have healing properties. Yeah, of course. If you have the omnipotent God, sure. Does that mean that he did it? No. So that's not why I say it's like believing in unicorns, the fact that God could do it. Could God have created a universe with different sets of a different type of logic? Yes. But that is not the universe we live in. So from our perspective, we're going to inhabit this world and then explore it and have certain strictures that are applied to finite beings.
This one,
I think it's strange that you said infinity can't be defined, and then you went on to define it, and infinity does have a definition, when I think what you meant is infinity isn't quantifiable. It can't be defined.
Yes, but as in the infinitude itself, it's just that I mean it as an endless, we just don't stop counting.
Sure, but that's the definition. I think what you meant is that it's not quantifiable.
Yes, fair enough. Cool. I was being more colloquial.
This one from Tanner H says, Posh, what is more likely? The creator of the universe revealed himself to the pre-science age people, or that pre-science age peasants came up with some mythology to try and explain their surroundings? Thanks.
What is more rational, or did he say rational or likely?
What is more likely?
That is sort of a question that can't be answered. Like, what is more likely? Sort of like similar to Occam's razor. It's not a foolproof methodology. Sure, you could say one or the other. That's sort of the Durkheimian approach to.
This is where you start to see the cracks forming in real time. Because what is happening in this opening section is not just a debate about God. It is a masterclass in what happens when someone keeps moving the goalposts every single time a question gets too uncomfortable to answer directly. Posh opens by saying that people who ask what God can or cannot do are making a mistake because they inhabit a reality that God established. And look, to be fair to Posh, that is at least a coherent theological position to take. He is trying to argue that finite beings cannot apply finite rules to a transcendent being. That is a real philosophical argument that serious thinkers have made for centuries. But then something fascinating happens. Posh says God could create a unicorn from a horse. Yes, absolutely. The horn would have healing properties. Of course, if God is omnipotent, then sure. And Matt immediately catches something that the audience might have missed. Posh just said that infinity cannot be defined, and then defined it in the very next sentence. Matt called it out directly, saying he thought it was strange that Posh said infinity cannot be defined, and then went on to define it. Now, this might seem like a small moment, but it is not, because what it reveals is a pattern. Posh makes sweeping claims, and then, when pressed, he quietly walks them back or redefines them without acknowledging the contradiction. And you have to understand, this is the same pattern that plays out for the entire debate. I know every time a question gets sharp enough to require a real answer, Posh retreats into a new framework. And then came the probability question from the audience. What is more likely? That God revealed himself to pre-science people, or that pre-science people invented mythology. And Posh's answer was essentially, that question cannot be answered. That it is like Occam's razor, which is not a foolproof methodology. Think about what that response communicates. A person defending Christianity as rational just told you that the most basic probability question about the origin of religion is unanswerable. That tells you everything you need to know about where this debate is headed.
What is religion, that people saw these events and then sort of ascribed it to entities, etc., etc. What is more likely when we're talking about past events? Doesn't necessarily need to happen. Is it? I can't think of a proper example, but if someone flipped 10 coins in a row and got the same, head or tails, got tail 10 times in a row. And is it more likely that he lied, telling people that he did it, or that he actually did it? Well, if he did it, it doesn't matter in evaluation what is more likely.
You got it. This one coming
but
in.
It does matter what's more likely and what's more probable, and that goes to rationality. This is, for example, this is something I've done many times. If all 1,500 people who were watching were sitting here, and I said, okay, everybody flip a coin, and if you got heads, flip it again, and if you got heads, flip it again, and if you got heads, we would, with an audience this side, we would easily get at least one person who will have honestly flipped heads 10 times in a row. That's the way the math works out. And this is an example I've done in magic shows, and other people have as well, to demonstrate this. When the caller's asking you what's more likely, all they're saying is, what is it more rational to believe is the likely conclusion based on all the available evidence? And the thing is, if you don't have, or you are ignoring some of the available evidence, then your conclusion about what's more likely or what's more probable or what is possible, what is rational, may not be accurate. That was the whole point.
But that is not what I was addressing. I was saying if someone did actually,
you haven't been addressing the topic all day.
Indeed,
you address whatever you want.
What I said is if someone actually did it. So
and
it is an event.
An example where somebody did it.
Okay, no. If someone actually did it,
I gave an example.
Post factum, does the likelihood of that happening determine whether it did happen or not?
This one coming in from, do appreciate your question. A Call to Reason says, Posh, why do you rely on a theistic understanding of mind and pretend that creates a problem for naturalism? Nothing about mind defies brain explanations.
I said mechanisms do not produce epistemology. That is my point. Any belief, if it is calculated in the future, what will happen? It is, if you reduce it to, let's say, an atomic level, It's just interactions of atoms. There's nothing that is true or false about it. It just is. All it's matter and energy. All of it is something that can be calculated if you have sufficient knowledge. Granted, we don't. That is also something I mentioned. So if you are just going to reduce everything to these interactions, where is the truth or falsity of that?
So
there is nothing affecting it.
Sorry, I thought you were done.
I am, man.
So the debate was, is Christianity rational, which isn't necessarily tied to truth. But when you say that if minds are essentially just mechanisms, then there's no truth there. That is actually false, because truth is a comparison of things.
Now, we get to the core of what Posh has been building toward this entire debate, and I want you to pay close attention here, because this is where his central argument finally gets stated clearly, and where it immediately runs into serious trouble. Posh states directly that mechanisms do not produce epistemology. That is his point, that if you reduce everything to an atomic level, it is just interactions of atoms, and there is nothing true or false about any of it. It just is. Matter and energy playing out. No truth, no falsity, just mechanism. And you have to understand this. This is actually a position that has real philosophical weight behind it. There are serious thinkers who have wrestled with this question for a long time. The hard problem of consciousness is genuinely difficult. Posh is not making this up from nowhere. He is drawing on a real tradition of thought that says materialism struggles to account for the normative dimension of knowledge. But here is where the argument breaks down. Matt does not just dismiss it. He engages it directly. He says, when you claim that minds as mechanisms means there is no truth, that is actually false. And here is why. Truth is a comparison of things. As long as a mind can hold a concept about reality, and there is a reality to compare it to, the truth value of that concept exists. Full stop. It does not matter whether that mind came about by purely mechanistic means. It does not matter whether it was designed by a designer. None of those things are relevant to whether what it does produces truth and reliability. This is the part that blows my mind, because Matt just took Posh's entire foundational argument and showed that it contains a hidden assumption that was never demonstrated. Posh assumed that the origin of a mind determines whether its outputs can have truth value. Matt showed that is simply not the case. The origin is irrelevant. The comparison to reality is what matters. And that comparison works regardless of how the mind got there.
And so as long as a mind can hold a concept about reality, and there's a reality to compare it to, then the truth value of that concept exists independent of whether or not that mind came about by purely mechanistic means, whether or not it was designed by a designer. None of those things are relevant to whether or not what it does produces truth and reliability. You're asserting that it can't do that without a God, but you haven't demonstrated that. And as a matter of convenience, rather than demonstrating it, you're just going to keep asserting that in a naturalistic universe, that can't happen, which is absolutely false and dishonest. Because as long as a brain can hold a concept and it can map to something in reality, then it has a truth value. And if we can evaluate it and do that comparison, then we have a truth value.
And I said that you cannot have truth values if that is the case. Like I'll give a different example to 2 plus 2 equals 5. If you mentioned the thing, let's say you have a sensor for light, and you program it to say when it detects light to say light is off, and when it doesn't detect light to say light is on.
Okay.
Right? So
you programmed it to give the false response.
What makes it false?
Because it's not consistent with the reality. That's what I just explained, is that the concept in the brain is about reality, and you compare the concept in the brain to reality to determine its truth value. I don't know why this is hard, but if you programmed it to give an answer that is the opposite of that, then it is false with respect to reality.
But it is the mechanism itself. You again giving me the mind. I'm saying you would be that that sensor. Every brain would be that type of sensor. You don't know what it's programmed to react to properly or improperly.
Right, which is, so yes, somebody could have a brain that is entirely programmed to run backwards, to give false where it's true and true where it's false. But that reliability is still a truth value, which is borne out by comparing it to reality. And because we have the senses that allow us to compare our internal model with the external model, both, this is the reason why science uses independent confirmation and peer review. Because that exists, we are now able to refine our model and change that. None of that supports your assertion that it's impossible without a God.
This is where everything lands. And Matt does not just win this exchange. He exposes something about how Posh has been arguing for this entire debate that the audience needs to sit with for a moment. Matt says it directly. Posh is asserting that a mind cannot produce truth without God, but he has not demonstrated it, not once. And rather than demonstrating it, he has been asserting it over and over as if repetition is the same thing as evidence. Matt calls this absolutely false and dishonest. And the word dishonest is doing real work here. It is not just saying Posh is wrong. It is saying Posh knows the assertion is unsupported and keeps making it anyway. Then Posh tries to rescue his position with the sensor analogy. He says if you program a sensor to say light is off when light is on, that false response is just a mechanism. It has no ability to self-regulate. And to Posh, this proves that mechanisms cannot produce genuine truth claims. But here is what people do not realize about that analogy. Matt had already answered it before Posh even finished making it. The concept in the brain is about reality. You compare the concept to reality to determine its truth value. That is what makes the sensor wrong. Not that it is a mechanism, but that its output does not match reality. The mechanism is not the problem. The mismatch is the problem, and that mismatch can be identified and corrected without any supernatural intervention at all. That is exactly what science does through independent confirmation and peer review. And then Matt lands the final line. None of Posh's examples support the assertion that truth is impossible without. Every single analogy Posh used actually demonstrated the opposite of what he was trying to prove. The sensor example showed that truth value comes from comparing output to reality. The peer review example showed that humans can correct errors without divine guidance. Posh built his own trap and walked straight into it. So, what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video.